To the 1 o'clocks, Detroit Lions at the New Orleans Saints. Lions coming off their difficult loss on Thanksgiving, because that's what they've been doing in recent years. And the Saints also coming off of some of their own disappointments. Lions still 8-3 in charge in the NFC North. The Saints at 5-6, technically behind the Falcons in the NFC South, but they both have the same record, 5-6. Saints are the only team in the NFC South with a positive point differential at +7. So, what's the line here? Sorry, I clicked off of it.
Saints +4.
Yeah, Lions are favored by 4 here in the Dome. What are you looking for here?
Yeah, it's another. The Lions have had these weird games now where, generally speaking, this season everything's going well, right? They're 8-3. They have the division in hand. They're probably not in contention for that number 1 seed because of where Philadelphia is, but like they're in a great spot and in great shape. But their losses have been concerning, each one of them, and they've been sort of spread out, right? Like they lose early in the season to Seattle, and then everything either side of that is good, right? They obviously get the opening night win against Kansas City, albeit a depleted Kansas City team, but then handily beat Atlanta, handle Green Bay, obviously beat Carolina, Tampa Bay, and then boom, a loss where they get annihilated on both sides of the ball by Baltimore. You're like, ooh, that was weird. And then you get a win against the Raiders, a win against the Chargers, a win against the Bears, and then this ridiculous loss against Green Bay on Thanksgiving where, again, nothing was working for the Lions on either side of the ball, completely out of character. And unlike Baltimore, they're not a team that should be doing that to you. Like the Ravens, you can go, okay, maybe they're the best team in the AFC and therefore the NFL. We can kind of chalk that up to just a really good team showing up at the right time. Green Bay is not that. Like that game on Thanksgiving should not have happened to the Lions. So do they bounce back again the way they bounced back the previous 2 times, and they're going to go on a run again, beat the Saints, beat the Bears, beat the Broncos, beat the Vikings, put themselves right at the top of the NFC? Or have these games that keep coming along every few weeks highlighted the sort of fragility of this Lions, season this year?
Yeah, they're tough to predict. They're easier to predict than the Saints, though. The Saints have, they have all the metrics. Like when I was looking at the Cowboys and their all of the outstanding metrics I was looking for the Cowboys, like how good are their corners when you target them and all these great numbers. Like the Saints are right behind the Cowboys. The Saints can play that shutdown level defense, and then when you look at the offensive personnel, all year I've been saying, look at all these playmakers. Of course, Derek Carr can get the ball to them. They're just one of the most horrendous red zone teams I've ever seen in my life. The Saints. I mean, that's really the difference. Between the 20s, they're good, and once they get to the 20, they're horrendous, and they find ways. And I think last year was a similar issue with the Saints with Andy Dalton. It's been an issue with Derek Carr across, whether it was with the Raiders or with the Saints. But yeah, you're right. Like predicting the Lions kind of laying an egg every few weeks, it's difficult to do because just a few weeks ago, their game against, I don't want to say it was a perfect game. It was a perfect game offensively against the Chargers. They were rough defensively. I think what's catching up to the Lions, though, is their pass rush being
the defense generally. I mean, they're banged up in the secondary. They haven't found that extra complementary piece pass rushing to Aiden Hutchinson. And yes, that's the one trend now for a month plus that's been consistent is the defense has not been riding at the same level it was earlier in the year. They can be attacked.
And I don't think that was a team-building failure. I think, James Houston remember he had that incredible run last year on about 100 snaps. It was like, okay, this guy will be a great situational rusher. He's only played 31 snaps this year. He's been hurt.
Yeah.
Charles Harris
was coming off. Had a lot of injuries.
Yeah. Charles Harris was coming off a career year. They had the Okwaras there. They had solid options opposite Aiden Hutchinson. But I do think if you're a Lions fan, the only thing you're going to look at in hindsight is say, okay, at the trade deadline, when the 49ers, when Chase Young is like the 5th best pass rusher on the 49ers and he'd be number 2 for the Lions, you're going to look back and say, should we have tried to add somebody? So that is the thing. And even way back week 1 against Kansas City, Aiden Hutchinson had 8 or 9 pressures, but they couldn't sack Mahomes because most people can't anyway. But it was just one. There's a lot of plays where it's just one isolated pressure. and you can avoid one guy.
Yeah.
And you need those plays where you're collapsing the pocket and pressing the quarterback, and the Lions just don't have that right now. Some games, but I think that's what's catching up and starting to bite just a little bit on that side of the ball.
Yeah, losing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was a big loss to that secondary.
For sure.
Like, they've had injuries in the secondary as well. I think just generally across the board, this defense is now becoming a concern for Detroit. It can be exploited. It can be attacked. It's not the strength it was earlier in the season. They were defending the run spectacularly well early in the year. That's not the case anymore. And they don't affect the pass well enough because they've lost players on both ends, the pass rush up front and the back end, the secondary. So I think that's becoming a weakness. And if that's the case, you need the offense to sort of have its best games, right, and step up and pick up the slack from the fact that the defense is now a potential weakness or can be exploited. And in fact, the opposite is happening. Like, the offense is having these stuttering games in critical moments sometimes.
The one other thing I want to highlight here is 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think just 2 weeks ago, Jared Goff had the highest PFF grade. He is now down to number 12.
Back-to-back, his worst games of the season.
Yeah, and again, it's just I think it was the nature of the grading right now, where there was a whole bunch of players. There's really a bunch of players clustered together in how well they're playing. And while guys like Dak Prescott continue to play elite football, and guys like Josh Allen are still playing solid, and Lamar and Trevor Lawrence, Goff had those 2 bad games.
He's dropped almost 10 grading points in 2 weeks.
Yes. Because they were bad the last couple weeks.
Yeah, because
he's 7 turnover-worthy plays, 6 turnover-worthy plays over the last 2 weeks.
And back-to-back games that were in and around 50 as a grade.
So half of Goff's turnover-worthy plays have come over the last 2 weeks. The question for me is, I've said before, is this a slump? Is he not seeing it? It did look like 2 weeks ago against the Bears, he wasn't seeing it, just wasn't seeing the field, putting the ball in harm's way in a different way than he had been for the rest of the year. Green Bay kept putting the ball on the turf. Is this a sustained slump? Some people were questioning if he had a little hand injury or maybe the little hands. They were struggling holding on to the ball. So some question marks there as far as Goff in this offense. I still think they're very capable, and me trying to predict what the Saints are going to do, when on paper so many of the pieces are good, they just hit this lull in the red zone, man. So all that said, where are you going this one?
They have bounced back very well, which from every one of these setbacks, which is the only thing that makes me really buy into the idea of the Lions. That being said, I think the Saints can have joy against that defense. Man, I don't know. I'm torn on this one. Let's go New Orleans.
I'm back and forth on it too. New Orleans as home underdogs. I don't want to bet on the Saints. Remember, every year we say this, right? This has been the remember the Jags a couple years ago. I'm like, I don't want to predict what you're going to do.
Yeah.
The Saints are that team this year. I will never be surprised by what the Saints do, if they're disappointing or if they look like an elite team. I do think at the end of the day, they should still win the NFC South. With all their issues, they should still win the NFC South, for whatever that's worth. I'll take the Lions, though. As you mentioned, they are able to bounce back, and I think at the end of the day, the situational football will be in their favor.